The movie HiFive continues to rank highly in Korea's box office and is receiving a positive global response ahead of its fresh release in North America on Friday. The action comedy film is being referred to as the Korean version of Avengers. So today, we want to talk about the new possibilities of Korean superhero movies like HiFive, as well as the technology involved in such productions. For that, we are joined by Jae Soh, professor and filmmaker at Seoul Institute of the Arts. Welcome back, Professor Soh.
Nice to be back.
Professor. So, Professor Soh, HiFive has been nearing 1.6 million viewers as of this Friday. The movie by director Kang Hyung-chul, and I believe you're one of the viewers. So am I. So, how did you like the movie? What's your assessment?
Well, I think it's a great movie. Kang Hyung-chul is a director that is famous for Sunny, the movie Sunny, which is a comedy, also Speed Scandal. So those are the big films. But he's somebody that I think really understands Korean culture. And in HiFive, even though you have all these characters that suddenly come up with superpowers from getting an organ transplant, you have a character who's like a taekwondo, played by Jae. You also have Ramiran, who's like she rides the yoga cart. So these are like kind of everyday Koreans that you see, and then you see Yoo in there as well, and they all start to develop these special powers. So I think it's kind of a fun summer movie, and right now, because Korea was under duress from all the political stuff, I think people wanted to get away, and I think HiFive was a perfect kind of action, comedic thriller type of thing. Yeah.
It definitely is perfect film. We need those big action movies to, get away from everything in reality. But the storyline of the film is very unique. The characters are one of a kind, but these fun factors are not the only reason behind success. So what are some of the factors of success of this film?
Well, Kang Hyung-chul is pretty much a very mainstream director, and with Sunny, and so this has been like 7 years for him to develop this movie. So this was shot in 2021. As you know, like The Match, it has Yoo who had a scandal, and because of that, this movie was delayed. And I think it's kind of unfortunate because in The Match, which starred Lee Byung-hun with Yoo in the promotional part of the movie, Yoo didn't show up. And in this one as well, you have all these people like Jae, Ramiran, coming out in this movie, and he was kind of not there. But in the movie, he's really terrific. So that's the thing. But the other thing, as you mentioned, it's like kind of an escapist kind of story where you have these people that suddenly develop superpowers from an organ transplant. Then you have a cult leader who gets younger. He has superpowers, and he's trying to like take the powers away from everybody by taking their organs. So I think it really kind of talks about Korean society in a way, how it's kind of like dog eat dog, and also just the humor comes from just all the characters, and the director is really good with witty dialogue, and so watching it, I felt like, yeah, it's like the Avengers, but funnier than that, and also the effects are just terrific,
Right. We're going to talk about those effects later on again, but I also have to really mention these actors there. You mentioned Ramiran, and also you mentioned Lee Jae-in, but there's also An Jae-hong and Shin-gu, so many big names. But also there is an idol member there from GOT7, I guess, Park Jin-young, and he also did a fantastic job. So all the acting as well as the visual effects, all that combined, I guess, led to the success of this movie. But science fiction or films involving these superpowers here in Korea, I can't really recall that it was a strength of the Korean film industry, but can you name some notable productions, similar productions that involve superheroes in Korea?
Well, there's kind of a tradition of that. There's movies like The Alienoid that came out. It wasn't a big box office hit, but it played on Netflix. Also, the same director, Choi Dong-won, he did Jeonuchi, which is kind of like a time travel movie, which he also replicated in Alienoid. But you also have director Yeon Sang-won's Psychokinesis, which is about somebody that can have the power to move things, and The Haunter and Wuchi. These are films that sort of dealt with sort of either having powers that are supernatural coming from some sort of traditional Korean ancient sort of mystical, kind of powers that in that enhance the character's sort of humor. But it's also like kind of interesting when you look at it that these films are also kind of based in comedy as well. So it's not a really serious movie in the sense that I think, you look at all the Avenger movies or the Marvel movies, and there's always this element of humor put in there. And I think the reason is because when you have people flying around and you have powers, it's really kind of ridiculous. So I think if you throw in some humor along with the special effects, it seems to do really well. But in Korea, there's also a movie that was meant for the theaters called Space Sweepers, which came out on Netflix. And that was like a big kind of benchmark movie for VFX in Korea because it's one of the first films that Korea did standalone without giving it to other countries. And they had to create the whole entire environment of the spaceship and everything in it. So that kind of like changed the thing. And going back to HiFive, one of the reasons why the effects are so good is because the delay because of UI, and it gave the people more time to work on the film in terms of special effects, and that always helps.
Wow, more time. And I have to say, superhero movies are one of my favorites. So I'm curious if the Korean superhero movies are any different from, a superhero movies that's made by Marvel or DC. Maybe Korean superhero movies, take more consideration into in terms of reflecting the sentiments of Koreans. Is there a difference, big difference?
Well, one of the biggest differences is the budget. So what's really good about Korean sort of CG or VFX, we called it, sort of infused movies is that in Hollywood, like Avatar had a budget of the whole movie was 400 million. And then in Korea, it's like between 30 and 15 million. And they're getting the effects almost, I would say, if you look at the quality of it, it's like almost 80% of the quality of Hollywood at, like a miniature portion of what the budget is for that. And I think the way, sort of in the past, a lot of people, I remember, when zombie movies, like Train to Busan came out, a lot of people are like, Koreans don't like zombie movies or special effects movies. But as you know, like everybody watches Hollywood. So the expectation is that, it could also work with a Korean language film. And it's been a recent phenomenon. It jumped from like, I think the mid 2010s to now, and a lot of sort of VFX stuff is really happening. There's also, the invisible VFX, which is, we have movies like, HiFive or, Space Sweepers that you really see their visual effects, but, people don't really know that there are over 500 effects shots in Parasite. Ah. It's like, you don't know that it's happening, but it's kind of done to trick the eye. For example, in Parasite, they only built the first floor for the house in that movie. Sorry about the spoiler, but it's a 3-story house, and the rest of it was done by CG. Yeah.
Well, let's go a little deeper into that technology and VFX or visual effects. I mean, even the best actors, they need visual effects when they have to fly around. So tell us a little bit more about how effectively those were used in the recent HiFive movie.
Well, basically the way, I think the way the director sort of sets the tone. And there's now I think it's in Hollywood and Korea is the same thing, but we have sort of the person in charge of VFX is called the VFX supervisor. And he is somebody that not only does sort of like oversee all the artists, could be like hundreds of artists working on it, but he will go to the set where there's actual filming done and then determine what the elements are. We're going to recreate, say, this filming environment in a 3D space on a computer. So he's somebody that kind of juggles between the actual director of the film that has a vision of it and then how to realize it to the screen. And so I think what Kang Young-chul did really well was like, he didn't want to make it too comic booky. He actually told the VFX people, like, I want to make it realistic, which is a challenge because, there's some fantastic stuff that is happening in this movie. So there's a character that he has super breath. He'll breathe something and it's like things freeze up and things like that. But those are kind of elements that I think VFX was used very effectively because I think it goes with the story. Also the way the director has envisioned the whole universe inside HiFive. and then the VFX artists understanding what needs to be done to sort of realize that for the audiences to look at it going, wow, this looks real. You know?
It definitely was a visual spectacle for the audience, I have to say.
Yeah, so it was definitely used well in HiFive, but I feel like there's more and more movies that use this VFX and play an important role. So I want to ask, where does Korea's VFX, visual effects technology stand as of right now, and how do you see it develop in the future as well?
As you mentioned, like it's becoming sort of recognized around the world. Like I just read this Hollywood reporter's article. It's called Cannes, How South Korea has become a VFX powerhouse. And one of the reasons that happens is because you know, we have a couple of studios like Dexter Studio or Westworld. You know, I just visited a place called M83, which is like a smaller VFX company. And all these companies, when I visited them, was that they started to get a lot of work almost at the time of COVID. You know, where it was like, okay, productions are going into place, but you know, a lot of movies were shutting down, but these effects houses were still going at it because, you know, series like something like, you know, Squid Game needs to come out. So they would just, so it would start out with like maybe 10 or 20 people in the company, and now it's in the hundreds. So, and one of the big partners, you know, our industry's too small, but I think one of the big partners is China. So they're, you know, Dexter Studio basically worked on a huge Chinese budget of movies. Most of Chinese productions, people don't know, are almost at the scale of Hollywood. So we're talking about like, you know, even $100 million movie that's made. You know, so Wandering Earth was like a big, you know, effects movie about basically the Earth kind of moving away from our solar system. And the effects were done by a Korean company. And they're starting to get really recognized. I know that for Squid Game, there's a studio called Gulliver Studios that actually got an Emmy prize for VFX for, you know, basically Squid Game. So we're getting really recognized. And one of the great things about it is that it's not only good, the quality, but it's just done on a cheaper, quicker scale. So I think that's the sort of effectiveness of Korean VFX and CG technology.
Right. And speaking of recognition from the global audience, HiFive actually has been released in a number of countries, like Asian countries, but also is going to be released in North America, including the US this Friday. So what do you think? Do you think HiFive can reach the audience just like King of Kings recently, for instance?
Well, if you want to compare the two, King of Kings is an animation with all these American and British actors in it. So it's not a good comparison. I don't think it's going to do as well as King of Kings, but there's a niche audience for Asian content all the time. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to Dallas, for example, and I met a lot of people that knew Korean stuff, you know, as far as like, they really like anime to start out with, but now their sort of like interest level started to go into Korean dramas and movies as well. So who knows what will happen, but I know HiFive will definitely do really well in Asia, because I think, like anything, you know, one of the big countries is Vietnam, because Vietnam is like us. They believe in Confucius. Their society is really similar. So some of the values that sort of translate, whereas I think if you see HiFive, there are a lot of like idiosyncratic Korean things happening. I don't really know, maybe because of K-food and K-beauty products that like a Western or American audience would really understand everything. But I know, you know, Squid Game is definitely very Korean, and yet it just kind of like, you know, people want to know how to make the little snacks or basically red light, you know, green light. Those games are sort of like Korean style, but they all want to know what it is. So I think hopefully HiFive will sort of generate that kind of interest in, you know, North America.
And another thing that I hope is that if really this movie turns into the Korean-style Avengers, we could have another sequel maybe later on, and these characters having to go on new missions. Well, thank you very much, Professor Soh, for your insights today, and have a great weekend, and high five.
High five.
And high five to you, Bella. Have a great weekend as well, and see you next week.
Yes, I'll see you back next week.